Okay, so you want to own a golf course. Rolling green fairways with your name on the sign out front. Members waving from the clubhouse porch. A slow Sunday morning watching foursomes tee off while somebody else does the actual work. That's the picture. That's what the real estate listing photos are built to make you feel. It is not that picture. Golf courses are one of the strangest businesses in America, because the asset that makes them beautiful is the exact same asset that quietly bankrupts most of the people who own one. You are not really buying a business. You are buying several hundred acres of extremely specific land, and betting that enough people will pay to walk across it before something else becomes more valuable than grass. Let's start with what it costs just to bring one into existence. An 18-hole regulation golf course needs somewhere between 150 and 200 acres. Before you've poured a single yard of concrete, before you've planted a single blade of turf, the land alone can run anywhere from a few $100,000s in a rural market to well into 8 figures near a city. Then comes construction. Earth moving, shaping fairways and greens out of raw dirt, running miles of drainage pipe underneath all of it, installing an irrigation system sophisticated enough to keep 150 acres of living turf alive through a summer. A standard public course, no frills, lands somewhere between $5 and $15 million all in. A premium private course with championship-grade turf, water features, and a designer's name attached can blow past $25 million before the clubhouse is even framed. Break it down per hole, and the number that keeps showing up across the industry is somewhere between a few $100,000 and well over $1 million per hole for an 18-hole layout. The greens alone are a specialized product. Tournament-quality bentgrass or Bermuda turf for 18 greens averaging 6,000 square feet each can quietly consume over $1 million by itself, because that turf has to be graded, drained, and maintained to a tolerance that would be unreasonable for almost any other patch of grass on Earth. And before any of that construction begins, you're paying a golf course architect, because the layout of a course is not decoration, it is the entire product. Reputable designers charge anywhere from $50,000 to several $1 million depending on their name recognition, because the shape of the land is what determines whether golfers come back or never return. Add environmental permitting, wetland studies, soil surveys, drainage engineering, and you are looking at another few $100,000 before the first tee box exists. If your site touches a wetland or a protected stream, add mitigation costs that can run into 7 figures on their own, because federal and state regulators do not treat 150 acres of engineered land casually. So here is the honest starting number. A basic public course, minimal amenities, efficient land, $5 to $10 million. A serious private club with championship ambitions, $15 to $30 million, sometimes more. That's before a single membership has been sold. And permitting alone can take 6 to 18 months before a bulldozer ever touches the property, because local zoning boards, environmental regulators, and water rights authorities all have to sign off separately, on their own timelines, none of which are in any hurry to accommodate your construction loan's interest clock. Now here's what nobody mentions when they picture cutting the ribbon. The building phase alone typically takes 18 months to 2.5 years, and during every single one of those months, your capital is deployed and producing exactly $0 of revenue while interest accrues on whatever you borrowed to build it. Once the course opens, the operating costs don't slow down, they just change shape. Annual maintenance on an average 18-hole course runs somewhere between $500,000 and over $1 million a year, and at a high-end private club that number regularly exceeds $1 million on its own. More than half of that maintenance budget is labor. A crew of groundskeepers has to mow greens daily, sometimes twice a day in peak season, rake bunkers, monitor soil chemistry, and hand-manage an irrigation system that can run $100,000 to $300,000 a year in water alone, depending on your climate and your local water rates. Add fertilizer, pesticide, and seed, another $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Add equipment. A single fairway mower can run 6 figures, and a course needs a fleet of specialized mowers, each one calibrated for a different type of turf, each one requiring its own maintenance and eventual replacement. Then there's the clubhouse, the pro shop, food and beverage operations, cart fleets that need replacing every few years, insurance that has climbed steadily across the entire hospitality and recreation sector, and property taxes on a piece of land large enough to be its own small neighborhood. A typical course employs somewhere between 30 and 50 full-time staff, plus a wave of seasonal hires for 7 or 8 months of peak play. Insurance deserves its own line, because it's grown into one of the quieter cost pressures in the business. You're insuring general liability for a property where members of the public swing metal clubs and drive motorized carts across uneven terrain all day. Liquor liability if you're serving alcohol at the clubhouse or the halfway house. Property insurance on a building and an irrigation infrastructure worth millions. And workers' compensation for a maintenance crew doing physically demanding outdoor labor with heavy equipment. None of that is optional, and none of it has gotten cheaper in recent years. A single lawsuit from an errant cart accident or a slip on a wet cart path can turn a quietly profitable year into a loss on its own. Here's how the money is supposed to come back. Green fees. Anywhere from $20 at a modest municipal course to several $100s at a marquee resort layout. Membership dues at private clubs, which can range from a couple $1,000s a year at a modest club to $50,000 or more at an elite one, plus an initiation fee that can run into six figures just to get in the door. Cart rentals. Pro shop merchandise. Food and beverage, which typically carries a healthy markup and, at a well-run club, can rival green fee revenue on its own. And events. Weddings, corporate outings, tournaments, all of which can fill a slow Tuesday with revenue that has nothing to do with anyone actually playing 18 holes. Add it all together and a typical 18-hole course generates somewhere in the range of $1.5 million a year in revenue. Compare that to $1 million or more in annual operating costs before you've touched debt service on the $20 million you might have borrowed to build the thing, and you start to see the shape of the problem. The margin between a course that thrives and a course that slowly bleeds out is thinner than the fairway grass itself. Now here's the trap almost nobody sees coming until they're the one holding the deed. In this industry, there's a phrase the people who track the business use to explain why courses close even when they look busy on a Saturday morning. The dirt is worth more than the grass. A golf course is, by design, a huge, flattish, beautifully maintained piece of land, usually sitting close to a growing suburb, because that's exactly where developers wanted them built in the first place. That means the same acreage generating a few $100,000s a year in green fees can, at any moment, become worth tens of millions of dollars the second a developer looks at it and sees 400 home lots instead of 18 holes. This isn't a hypothetical. It is the single most common reason golf courses actually shut down in America. Not because nobody wants to play golf anymore. Because somebody offers the owner more money for the real estate underneath the golf than the golf itself will ever generate. This creates a strange incentive running under the entire industry. Every year a course operates on thin margins is another year the owner is quietly weighing whether the grass is still worth more than the concrete that could replace it. And it means the golf course business isn't really one business. It's two competing businesses sharing the same asset. An operating recreation company and a very patient real estate holding company waiting for the right offer. To understand how this actually played out at scale, you have to go back to the building boom. Starting in the mid-1980s and accelerating hard through the 1990s, developers built golf courses across the country at a pace the industry had never seen before, and mostly for a reason that had nothing to do with golf. A golf course, it turned out, was one of the most effective tools ever invented for selling houses. Build a course, wrap a subdivision around it, and suddenly every lot backing onto a fairway commands a premium price. The golf course itself didn't need to turn a profit. It just needed to exist long enough to sell the homes around it. Over roughly 20 years, more than 4,000 new 18-hole equivalent courses were added to the national supply, an expansion of over 40%, driven by a golf boom, a booming economy, and a generational superstar who made the sport look exciting to an entire new wave of players. Then the housing market that had funded all of it collapsed in the mid-2000s, and the golf industry discovered it had built a supply of courses for a demand curve that no longer existed. Starting in 2006, for the first time in modern history, more golf courses closed in America every year than opened. That trend continued year after year for nearly 2 decades. Since that turning point, the country has shed a net total of more than 2,000 golf courses, roughly 13% of the entire national supply, gone. Here is the part that should sit with you. Most of those courses didn't fail because golfers stopped showing up. Rounds played in America have actually been near record highs in recent years. They failed because the land they sat on had become worth more as apartments, as retail, as anything other than a golf course, and because the operating margins on the golf itself were never fat enough to compete with what a developer was willing to pay for the dirt. Some closures were struggling value-tier courses that were simply outcompeted by nicer ones nearby. But a meaningful share were financially healthy courses whose owners looked at a check for tens of millions of dollars and looked at a spreadsheet showing 3% annual margins, and made the obvious choice. The industry has, in recent years, found something closer to balance. Course closures have fallen to their lowest levels in 2 decades, and financial distress among existing courses has dropped sharply compared to a decade ago, with only a small single-digit percentage of public and private facilities now reporting real trouble. But the underlying mechanism never went away. It just stopped accelerating. The dirt is still worth more than the grass in plenty of places. It's simply no longer worth more everywhere, all at once, the way it was during the correction. So what actually separates the courses that survive from the ones that eventually get sold for condominiums? Increasingly, it's the same answer you'd find in ranching, in trucking, in shopping malls. Multiple revenue streams stacked on top of the core product instead of depending on green fees alone. The clubs that are thriving right now have leaned hard into food and beverage, sometimes building restaurant and banquet operations that generate more annual revenue than the golf course itself. They've leaned into events, treating weddings and corporate outings as a primary business line rather than a side hustle for slow weekdays. Some have built real estate development directly into their business model on purpose, rather than having it happen to them, developing home lots around the course themselves and capturing that premium instead of watching a competitor buy the land out from under them later. And a growing number have added off-course golf entertainment, driving ranges with technology, indoor simulators, family-friendly formats that pull in the exact kind of new, younger player the sport has been trying to attract for years, players who might never book an actual tee time but will happily spend an evening hitting balls into a screen with friends. There's also a version of this business that looks nothing like a single owner tending one course. And it's worth understanding because it's where a growing share of the industry's real money now sits. Private equity and institutional operators have spent the last decade quietly rolling up golf courses into multi-course platforms, the same way other industries consolidate fragmented small businesses into larger, more efficient ones. Here's what genuinely gets better at scale. A company that owns 40 courses can negotiate fertilizer, seed, and equipment contracts at volume discounts no single owner could ever access. It can spread a single corporate maintenance and turf science team across dozens of properties instead of each course reinventing that expertise from scratch. It can shift underperforming rounds from an oversupplied course to an undersupplied one nearby using shared booking technology, and it can absorb a bad year at one property with strong years at 9 others, the exact kind of diversification a single course owner simply doesn't have. But scale brings its own weight. A 40-course platform isn't a golf business anymore, it's a real estate and hospitality conglomerate, and it needs a corporate layer to match. Regional operations managers, centralized HR and payroll, a legal team tracking liquor licenses and liability exposure across a dozen different states, and a finance team modeling debt service across a portfolio instead of a single mortgage. The owners who make that leap successfully stop thinking about tee sheets and start thinking about capital allocation, which properties to renovate, which to sell, and which markets are quietly becoming more valuable as neighborhoods than as fairways. The ones who can't make that mental jump from operator to allocator are the ones who end up with a debt-heavy portfolio and no coherent strategy for any single piece of it. Now, let's run the 2 honest scenarios. The optimistic case. You own a well-located daily fee course in a growing suburb with steady tee sheet traffic, a food and beverage operation that pulls its weight, and a healthy calendar of outings and events filling weekday afternoons that would otherwise sit empty. Your green fees and cart rentals cover your maintenance and payroll with room to spare, your restaurant covers a meaningful share of your fixed costs on its own, and the land underneath you keeps appreciating quietly every year even while the operating business turns a modest, steady profit. You're not getting rich off green fees. You're building equity in one of the more stable pieces of real estate in your market, with a cash-flowing business sitting on top of it the whole time. The realistic bad year. A wet spring cuts 3 weeks out of your peak season before you've booked a single group outing. Your irrigation system needs an unplanned repair that eats a chunk of your maintenance budget in a single month. A nicer course opens 20 minutes away and pulls your weekend regulars away with a renovated layout and lower introductory rates. Your membership renewals soften. Meanwhile, your property taxes, your insurance, and your water bill keep climbing regardless of how many rounds get played, because none of those costs care whether the tee sheet is full. Net operating income for the year lands somewhere between a small profit and a real loss, and somewhere in the boardroom or more likely at the kitchen table, Somebody starts running the numbers on what a developer would pay for the back nine. That's the entire business, condensed. A golf course is a hospitality operation with brutal fixed costs, thin operating margins, and a beautiful, valuable, extremely patient piece of real estate sitting underneath the whole thing, quietly waiting to see which version wins. The people who make real money owning golf courses over the long run are rarely the ones chasing green fee revenue alone. They're the ones who understood, from the very first day they signed the papers, that they weren't just buying a golf course. They were buying land that happens to have a golf course on it for now, and the value of that distinction only gets clearer with every year that passes.